Gnaeus Cornelius Scipio Asina, Consul 260 and 254 BCE. Son of the accomplished consul and censor Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus, and a scion of the patrician Scipio family, much was expected of this Scipio and his brother, who was named Lucius Cornelius Scipio after their father. However, Scipio Asina's performance on Rome's behalf was mixed. His indifferent record as a battlefield commander is due in large part to his misfortune in holding the unprecedented duty of commanding a Roman fleet against an experienced and skilled Carthaginian enemy. Rome had first commissioned its new battle fleet in the previous consular year 261. If Pliny the Elder is to be believed, then at least some ships from this new fleet left the dockyards a mere 60 days after the first timber was cut. While Rome seems to have had at least a small fleet dating back to the late 6th century or so, Rome had never been a major naval power, and the construction of this new fleet meant that Rome had to draw heavily on the expertise of its Greek subjects in the south of Italy. Most of the crewmen and ship captains were presumably men who did not have the benefit of experience, although between Rome's existing fleet and merchant shipping, we should not underestimate Roman naval skill too greatly, lest we misapprehend the balance of naval power. What is safe to conclude, however, is that Carthage had more experienced sailors and commanders, even if the degree of this advantage is difficult to quantify. The two consuls for 260 were Scipio and the new man Gaius Duilius. The duty of commanding a Roman battle fleet of 150 ships fell to Scipio by lot, while his colleague Duilius took command of the army in Sicily. Taking an advance squadron of 17 ships to Messana, Scipio wanted to scout ahead and prepare the city for the arrival of the main fleet. We can assume that this was a wise preparation, since such a large fleet would require considerable provisions, and this was a logistical challenge that the Romans had not yet faced. When his fleet arrived in Sicily, Scipio was presented with what seemed like a golden opportunity to distinguish himself and advance the interest of Rome. News arrived that the mercenary garrison at the city of Lipari was ready to defect to the Roman side. Scipio gathered his squadron and set out for Lipari at once. Meanwhile, the Carthaginian fleet stationed at Panormus, modern Palermo, learned of Scipio's move and also seems to have been aware that Scipio's force was small. The Carthaginian admiral was Hannibal Gisco, who had previously been defeated at Agrigentum, the first major land battle of the war. Hannibal dispatched his subordinate, the Carthaginian senator Boades, with 20 ships to Lipari to save the city from Scipio. Scipio arrived at Lipari and his fleet was received into the harbor. This must have initially seemed like quite a coup, since Scipio had captured a key Carthaginian-controlled port city at no cost and with only the vanguard of his fleet. We can imagine that the ambitious aristocrat believed that he was well on his way to equaling the fame and glory of his father, Scipio Barbatus. In fact, Scipio Asina would go on to become better known, but significantly less well regarded than his father for what happened next. Boades' fleet arrived on the scene hot on the heels of Scipio's ships and found the Roman vessels in the harbor at Lipari. Boades' ships blockaded the harbor and rendered Scipio helpless. Scipio's crews immediately understood the danger that they were in, and some of them panicked and abandoned their post. Presumably, while Scipio had managed to make it into the harbor, he had not gained control of the city itself, so he was trapped. Tactically, breaking out of a harbor was a tall task in ancient naval combat, as we can see from what happened to the vaunted Athenian fleet in 413 at Syracuse. With nowhere to go, Scipio surrendered himself and his 17 ships to the Carthaginians. The course of the battle leaves it unclear whether the defection offered by the mercenaries was genuine and Scipio was merely the victim of circumstance, or whether the whole thing was an elaborate ruse dreamt up by Hannibal Gisco and Boades. The fact that we only have the Roman perspective on the battle, and that the Scipio family had strong ties to our chief historical source for the First Punic War, the Greek historian Polybius, means that we can only speculate based on the known sequence of events. Either way, Rome was not impressed with Scipio's performance, and gave him the nickname Asina, which means Jackass. The masculine form of Jackass is Asinus, so giving Scipio the feminine form Asina was an added insult and probably refers to the cowardice involved in surrendering without putting up the kind of fight that was generally expected of a Roman. How harsh should we be to Scipio Asina for his failure at Lipari? It looks like the Roman public had a mixed response to the news of Scipio's performance. On the one hand, he earned an undesirable unofficial cognomen, and he undoubtedly was the butt of many jokes. One can only imagine that the criticism of Scipio's command only increased when his consular colleague Duilius succeeded where he had failed. On the other hand, as Krista Steinby observes, there are a couple of major reasons to consider giving Scipio something of a pass for Lipari. First, the fleet was newly constructed, and it is highly unlikely that Scipio had any prior experience fighting naval battles. True, we now know that the Romans possessed at least a small fleet for many years prior to the outbreak of the First Punic War, but certainly nothing on the scale or complexity of the Scipio's fleet. Further, as Steinby argues, Scipio deserves some credit for trying to capture Lipari, which would give the Romans a friendly port on the north coast of Sicily and enable deeper offensive operations in the western Carthaginian parts of the island. As for the supposed cowardice of Scipio's surrender, it does seem like he made the rational choice under the circumstances, so far as we're able to see them through the fog of time. There is, of course, the distinct possibility that many of the jabs that Scipio received for his conduct were due to some kind of personal unpopularity or unpleasantness, and that someone who was more affable may have been able to avoid a stigma for a similar, understandable defeat. Whether the loss of 17 ships was due to his incompetence, or was merely a piece of bad luck, Scipio Asina was a patrician, and as such his career was largely invulnerable to failure or incompetence. In 254 BCE, he was elected to the consulship once again, and in conjunction with his consular colleague, he captured the vital city of Panormus, modern Palermo. One has to imagine that had the defeat at the Lipari Islands occurred on the watch of the Novus Homo Duilius, that his career would have gone a lot less favorably than the post-battle career of Scipio Asina.